So I would like to begin this event and evening by thanking our very, very generous sponsors and hosts, Skidmore, Owens and Merrill, SOM. So please give it up for them. It is their very, very generous space we are sitting in. They have designed this building and this space, so which does have a lot. So thank you so much for the space and the generosity. I would also like to now call on Health and Harmony board member Laura Tesh. I can see her. I'm going to give her a minute. I'm going to give Laura a minute to get together. So Laura Tesh is a board member and a member of the executive committee of the Health and Harmony board. Although there are many places that she's called her home. Her home is Wisconsin, US, and she's a member of the Bad River tribe. So please give it up for Laura Tesh, who's going to lead us into an acknowledgement.
Thank you, Devika. Bonjour, all my relations. Can you hear me? Okay. Welcome to this extraordinary event. I come in a good way, and I am honored to welcome you all this evening. In the spirit of healing, truth, and reciprocity, we acknowledge that we are on this land, originally called Mannahatta, the traditional territory and homeland of the Lenape people. Their land included all of what is now New Jersey, eastern Pennsylvania, southeastern New York State, northern Delaware, and a small section of Connecticut. With much gratitude, we recognize the descendant communities of the Lenape people, Delaware Nation and Delaware Tribe of Indians in Oklahoma, the Stockbridge-Muncie community in Wisconsin, and the Muncie Delaware Nation, the Moravian of the Thames First Nation, and Delaware of Six Nations, all in Ontario. And we remember that it is through their sacrifices, past and present, that we have the privilege to be here tonight. Also, less than 1 mile from this building, 7 World Trade Center, is the African Burial Ground National Monument, which contains the skeletal remains of more than 400 Africans, men, women, and children. Originally discovered in 1991, investigations revealed that during the late 17th and 18th centuries, 15,000 free and mostly enslaved Africans were buried in a 6-acre burial ground, the largest colonial era cemetery for people of African descent. These acknowledgements do not exist in the past tense or historical context. Through structural and systemic racism, we continue to live under a colonial system, a system that provides privilege to many and social, economic, and environmental injustices and inequalities to others. Thus, this is also a call to action, to remember that with privilege comes the responsibility to act individually and collectively, to become self-aware, and to promote and serve as agents in the ongoing process of decolonization. And this is why we're here today, to learn from and support the knowledge and work of the Indigenous leaders and the climate change makers that have gathered here today. Their presence and knowledge are gifts. They're gifts to us and they're gifts to the planet. So for our panel tonight, I extend heartfelt gratitude, Chi Miigwech, and I thank you all for being here, for listening, and for your support. Miigwech.
Thank you, Laura. We're now going to see a short video, and I'd invite Yasmin from SOM to please present. Take it away, Yasmin.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to have you all here, and great to host you here. And if you need anything, hopefully you're all comfortable, you have everything you need. And we wanted to show you briefly about what we do as SOM, but also we are big advocates for climate change, and we try to change our work and the industry to actually help all of us here. And I'll try to give you a brief presentation on that. So we are a global firm, and we have offices in all around the world, and we have very many awards, many innovations that we are proud of. And we are a multidisciplinary firm. We have many disciplines: architecture, interior design, engineering, etc. And we thrive with this relationship, learning from each other, collaborating with each other. And some of the projects I'm going to highlight today also benefited from that. And we make iconic architecture, and you're seeing some, you're in one, and you're surrounded by many around you. And particularly, we've been shaping cities for decades, and you're seeing around you probably many of the buildings that we worked on. And we like merging art and science together. And this is an image of the Moynihan train station, which is a great example of how we can preserve structures and give them a new life. We embrace technology, and we make beautiful things also sustainable. And we're committed to sustainability thoroughly. And I think this, we probably know, you probably know these, but we are in a period of time where we have already raised our temperature by 1.5 degrees. We know where we're going. It's not looking pretty. And we think that we have a role to play in the industry, and we're taking this seriously also. And extreme weather events that were called extreme weather events and 100-year events are no longer 100-year events, but they happen more frequently. And they have increased 4 times. It's unbelievable. They're going to become every 5-year event for us in our lifetime. And this also means that people have to move around. And it's crazy that 200 million people are estimated to be environmental migrants in the next 30 years. I mean, the scale of this is huge. And also, we know that with the changes to our climate, the health impacts are coming along with that. And we have about 250,000 people deaths a year expected, as announced by the World Health Organization, due to climate change. And I don't know if you know this fact, but this is mostly due to carbon emissions, and 40% of those carbon emissions come from the built environment, from your cities, from the materials we use, from the way the cities operate. So we take it very seriously that we have a role to play as architects, as engineers, as designers in this realm. So our question is, how can our designs respond? So we look at a couple of things. These are our commitments, and I would say that we are leading the industry. So we are actually right now a net zero carbon business with offsets this year. We're committed to becoming net zero operational carbon in 2030 and net zero carbon for all our projects in 2040. And some examples of these is, for example, we designed the first net zero operational energy building in the New York State. This is the PS62. And inside also reflects this kind of approach, and it's an innovative approach we've taken here. We're also not looking at just operational, but we're looking at the full carbon life cycle to make the biggest impact in every aspect we can in buildings, from extraction of materials to building use, electricity we use, and to what happens to our materials afterwards at the end of their lives when we demolish a building. With that in mind, a good example is we work with zero materials that are, or materials that are lower carbon, such as the Billie Jean King Library in Long Beach. And you might see how these materials actually represent themselves also in our designs too, of creating a warmer design, as well as actually having the radically reducing carbon in these buildings. And you see Merced as a larger scale campus. This is actually aiming to be a 000 campus with zero waste, zero carbon, and zero energy. And it's been a collaboration for 25 years. So some of these projects take a long, long time. You have to set goals today to make those 2030, 2040 dates that we're talking about. And we're very proud of this collaboration. And actually last year, it was announced to be the first public university to achieve carbon neutrality in the United States. So this kind of innovative approaches and pushing boundaries is very critical to our work. And we do this in every project. For every project we do, we look at their operational, embodied, and whole life carbon emissions, literally in every single one. And we monitor them actively. You can see that every project has a chart we craft, and we try to reduce it actively, look at design strategies we use, look at what else we can do by collaboration, by innovation, every project that we design. And finally, we even go beyond, because we don't believe that net zero is enough. So we say that I'm going to present a project called Urban Sequoia, and we believe that net zero architecture is just not enough anymore to address climate change and carbon emissions. So what if our buildings acted like trees? Can our buildings actively absorb carbon from the atmosphere like trees do? Can we actually create a forest of buildings that do this in a way? And we do this by integrating biomaterials, nature-based solutions, and also technological innovations such as direct air capture technologies, such as algae, microalgae systems, and such as systems like materials like biobrick. And I'm going to show a short video here. Hopefully this gives you a good indication of what we're aiming to do here. want to finish just with a small anecdote. When we were designing this project, actually, I have a 6-year-old son. So I was showing him once in a while, I was showing what we were doing, how we were trying to absorb carbon from the atmosphere to save the planet. And he would sometimes look at me. One time I showed it to him and I said, look, wouldn't it be amazing if all the buildings acted like trees? Can we absorb carbon from the atmosphere? And he looked at me, the 6-year-old looked at me and said, almost, silly woman, aren't we already doing that? He literally said, aren't we already doing that? I mean, so telling that maybe we should really be thinking the way that we think about buildings and be more progressive about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. With that, I'm going to show you another film. So I hope you keep your attention. We are airing Planet Protectors, the second season of Health and Harmony's Planet Protectors, which is going to officially air in COP27. As you see this, it is very difficult to bring the voices of Indigenous people and local communities to these spaces, to these important conventions. We at Health and Harmony have always striven to do this, and we can only bring so many. So our hope is that as you watch Planet Protectors, please hear from the communities that we work with directly. This is not a Health and Harmony trailer. It is more their voices on what they need from you, the world community, to live in balance with their environment. So without much ado, I present Planet Protectors 2.
Satria ty toerana misy anay ity zany dia tamin'ny andro taloha dia rakotra ala. Nefa taty aoriana izy io zany dia noho le etraketraky ny fiarahamonina dia lasa simba le ala. Ny ana maitso ty ala faritra ny misy anay anivorano ity. Ny anarako moa dia Andrianandraina Fanjanirina Pascaline dia mipetraka eto anivorano. Ny asako eto anivorano zany dia mpivarotra PPN zay zavatra ilain'olona amin'ny andavanandro. Ao ny vary, kafe, siramamy, pétrole, sira. Nefa ankehitriny zany dia somary mandalo olana kely ilay varotra satria niakatra be ny vidim-piainana dia tsy afaka hanjifan'ilay varotra ny olona aty ambanivohitra satria betsaka ny zavatra sedrainy. Ankoatran'izay moa zany amin'ilay asa sahaniko dia mbola mitondra fikambanam-behivavy eto amin'ity faritra misy anay ity. Fikambanam-behivavy io dia ny tenako manokana ny nanorina azy tamin'ny 3 taona lasa zay. Dia hoentiko anetana ireo manodidina satria akaiky ny ala ny toerana misy dia mba anetana an'zareo zany mba hikajy ny tontolo iainana. Zava-dehibe ny fisian'ny ala satria betsaka ny tombotsoa azo avy aminy, indrindra azahoana rano fisotro madio, fahasalamana. Ny asa ataony amin'ny fikambanam-behivavy io zany dia karakara zanakazo zay, manao pô, mamboly hazo, ary niezaka izay fikambanam-behivavy mananao fambolem-kazo, manentana ny manodidina satria tsapanay fa nisy fiovana ny toetrandro tao anatin'ny fotoana vitsivitsy. Satria zava-dehibe amiko zany indrindra president'ny fikambanam-behivavy ny fiarahamonina sy ny firaisan-kina. Ohatra zao hoe misy fambolem-kazo, tokony fikambanam-behivavy no anao an'ilay fambolem-kazo nefa entina anentanana an'ilay fiarahamonina amin'ilay firaisan-kina sy miafaratra amin'ny fambolena azy any anaty ala azy. Ny vokatry ny fiovaovan'ny toetrandro aty amin'ny faritra misy anay zany moa ny fiantraikany aminay aty zany dia ty faritra misy anay aty moa zany dia fiompiana sy fambolena ny tena iainan'ny olona aty amin'ny faritra misy anay aty. Dikan'izany zany dia tsy ampy ny orana, dia tsy afaka mamokatra ny olona tsirairay satria indraindray zany dia efa tafahoatra ny orana dia safotra atondra-drano misy. Rehefa tsy avy ny orana dia haitany misy. Dia lasa mihena zany vokatra miakatra amin'ny fambolen'ny olona tsirairay. Dia mba ilamina zany ty faritra misy anay ity ny tena faniriako zany e. Dia mba tsy hanana hoe angataka amin'ny fanampiana na ohatr'izany fa tena na aleo tena sy havita tena. Zay zany ny tanjona mba iriko amin'ity faritra izay ipetrahako ity, ary ho ala maitso zany le faritra manodidina anay.
For us at Health and Harmony and for the communities we work alongside with, Earth's independence has never been clearer than it is right now. We must rely on one another to support healthier people, healthier forest, and healthier planet. We collectively know that the most effective solutions to the climate crisis already exist and are being put into action every day. These solutions have been designed by the indigenous peoples and local communities who have been living in climate-critical rainforests their whole lives, just like Madam Fanja. Now it is critical to shift systems and create pathways to quickly finance these solutions, a pathway Health and Harmony has already begun walking on, along with others. With that, I welcome our moderator, Umair Irfan, to the stage. Umair Irfan covers climate change and energy for Vox. He has also contributed to Science Friday. Before joining Vox, Umair was a recorder with Climate Wire at E&E News in Washington, D.C. He holds a master's degree from Columbia University, Graduate School of Journalism. Please give it up for Umair Irfan. And I walked away with his mic.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you for joining us on such a lovely evening in such a wonderful space. But it's worth noting that, not all of us here in this world are so fortunate right now. Parts of the United States are reeling from hurricanes and disasters. Puerto Rico is still having a massive blackout. There's been massive flooding on the west coast of Alaska right now from a typhoon. There's flooding in Japan, Italy, and droughts across much of the US and parts of Central Europe. And there's now a warning for a major food crisis in the Western Sahel in Africa. So a lot going on, but as the videos show, that we have solutions to many of these problems, and we're going to be getting at some of that right now here on the ground. So to begin with, I would like to introduce our guests and our panelists here. Dr. Nicole Redvers. Can you please join us? Dr. Redvers, she is the co-founder of the Arctic Indigenous Wellness Foundation, which is an organization that's aimed at implementing and reviving traditional and indigenous practices for healing for individuals and for the planet. She's a researcher studying indigenous health and planetary health, and she's also a member of the Deninuque First Nation. Welcome, Dr. Redvers.
Thank you.
And I'd like to invite up our other panelist, Sophia Keanu. She is the founder of Climate Cardinals, which is an international nonprofit that extends the tools of climate research and activism to folks who don't speak English, and making this a more inclusive space for both people who are interested in climate change from the research and from the activism perspective. So please join us. Thank you for being here. Dr. Redvers, I'd like to start with you. Given your expertise in working with indigenous groups, I'm wondering, are there any specific case studies or examples that stand out in your mind about how indigenous solutions have been implemented and have benefited a situation, or perhaps the opposite, where we failed to include indigenous perspectives and that led to a detrimental outcome?
Masicho, thank you for the question, and thank you for being here on this incredibly important topic. And I'm happy that you stated solutions, because what tends to happen these days with increasing interest, as we could see here today, otherwise I wouldn't be sitting in this chair, is this tremendous increase in indigenous knowledges across the globe from many different sectors, including, of course, the climate change space, but also biodiversity space and the pollution space as well. And one of the fundamental problems with that is that we end up focusing on the solutions and the knowledges, but we forget to mention about the people who are behind those knowledges and the people who are behind those solutions. So I often ask folks, when you're talking about scale up solutions that are Indigenous based, first we need to talk about the community. First, we need to talk about the people, who they are, where they're rooted. Because one of the things about case studies when it comes to how our communities operate is the absolute diversity and expertise within regional environments across the globe, because the knowledge is completely and fundamentally intertwined with the land bases that we come from, and we cannot be separated from that. And that makes it challenging when you think about a case study, because you see, they're doing mangrove restoration here, or, wildfire suppression due to natural burns. But of course, that's only going to be applicable to that community in that way because of the tight connection between the land bases that we have. But the other piece that's often not thought about and talked about when it comes to case studies of Indigenous communities is the fundamental importance of Indigenous languages. And I would be curious to see if anybody's heard of Indigenous languages as a solution for the climate crisis. One. However, two, yay. And these are the types of things that makes these case studies a reality. It makes the case studies work because the languages are fundamentally tied to the land. Without the language, without the land, we don't have the solutions. We don't have the ability to capture these amazing works and projects that are going on in many spaces. And that's incredibly powerful, but we're missing key links that come from community, because if you ask community, what do we need? Oftentimes it won't make sense for people that are outside. How does language have anything to do with this? But it's fundamentally the basis for these success stories, as you say.
Is there a particular example, though, that stands out to you, or is there something in your experience that sort of highlights this?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, and I'm always, cautious, because when you highlight one community, it sort of, essentially puts them on the stone comparatively to others. And there's hundreds, there's thousands of communities that each have their own case studies of success and benefit across this nation, but also across the world and the communities that they go from. And my hope is that when we have forums like this, because when I give a name, the interest usually goes there, but then sometimes at the cost of other communities that might be there as well too. But what I can say from perspectives such as Health and Harmony and many of the great organizations, we're going to hear from another one later on today, it's not hard to find good positive case studies of success out there. But I will say, when it comes to the harm or the lack of acknowledgement, because you also countered with, what are some of the issues with the suppression of Indigenous knowledges, because that's really what it has been throughout, hundreds of years within this country, but also in other landscapes as well. One of the examples I can think of is the Batwa people within the southwestern portion of Uganda, who in the 1990s were forcibly evicted and removed from the forest for conservation measures to protect the gorillas. So the gorillas, of course, are on the borders between Uganda, Rwanda, and Congo. And the Batwa people are still not allowed to go back to the forest. In fact, one elder that I talked to a couple of weeks ago was arrested for going into the forest to pick their medicines because they are not allowed into the forest. The problem with that is we have a generation now that's been removed from that knowledge. So the younger generation is now not learning that ecological knowledge, the traditional ecological knowledge that houses those solutions. So we're really at a brink here when it comes to land-based knowledge acquisition for young Indigenous community members, so that we can see some of these solutions arise. Because if we can't even access our lands, then it makes it very difficult to think through what these co-solutions might be at a global scale.
I mean, that segues really nicely into my next question. As you noted, that there has been a lot more attention on Indigenous practices, but not necessarily on Indigenous people and personhood. And I'm wondering, what does an Indigenous-led framework actually look like? Like, if we were to start chalking this out and actually try to devote more resources to operationalizing all these things, what to your mind would be some of the best practices, or where do you even begin to start doing that?
Absolutely. I think we've seen it on the screen here, and I think it's even there listening. My elder always said that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. very simple teaching, but it says a lot in that. And we don't do enough of that, listening to communities, because for me to state that this is going to be the best for one community comparatively to another is completely wrong. And we always go in with these assumptions sometimes that either we know best or we bring in our lens of the world, how we see the world, the assumptions that we bring. There's a teaching that was given by an elder, an Anishinaabe elder. And they said, if you have a cup, a teacup that has a handle on it, and you sit in front of you on a table and the handle's facing you and the other part is facing me, but I've never seen a cup before in my entire life. And I ask you to describe, what do you see on that side of the cup? You describe the handle. Perhaps I'd describe, of course, the place that's flat, but we wouldn't know what was on the other side of the teacup. Who's right in that circumstance? We only see what is in front of us, how we've been raised, our worldview. But we need the multiplicity of knowledges and viewpoints to be able to know the reality of the world. And that's how we need to think about communities and the expertise and the knowledge, because they bring the other side of the cup that we're missing in most cases. But unless we sit there and listen to them describe that cup, it makes it very difficult to be able to get a better handle of the reality that we have today.
And Sophia, given your work on communicating about climate change, particularly to communities that have largely been left out of the discussion or often not included in many of these mainstream discussions, what tactics do you think have been proven to be most effective in terms of conveying the scope of the problem, but also the scope of solutions that are out there?
Well, my nonprofit, Climate Cardinals, we work to translate climate documents and resources into over 100 languages. So I realized that 80% of scientific literature is only available in English. Around 75% of the world doesn't speak English. And then when you look at key climate documents like the IPCC report, they're only officially available in the 6 UN languages that account for less than half of the world's speaking population. So something really critical for us when we're talking about indigenous languages and also languages in Africa, something that we did is we partnered with UNICEF. So they had this landmark report that came out where they were talking about the impacts of climate change on children. And they found particularly that in areas in Africa, that's where children were being disproportionately impacted. And yet their report was not going to be available in any of the local languages or dialects of the people that were being most impacted. And that's why we partnered with them to translate our report into multiple African and indigenous languages. And that's kind of the heart of Climate Cardinals' work, is making sure that we're translating documents and resources that talk about the impacts of what climate change is going to do to these local and grassroots communities, so that those communities can access those resources and get involved in advocacy and activism and actually understand the disaster.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to conveying that information, I mean, is there anything sort of universal in terms of how you reach all these other groups, or does it always have to be very, cultural and region specific?
So when we first started Climate Cardinals, we have over 9,000 student volunteers in 41 countries, and that is kind of the heart of our work, is working with young people who want to do this just to make a difference and to volunteer. And so we first we chose 2 different climate glossaries: the U.S. Forestry Glossary and the Condé Nast Sustainable Fashion and Climate Emergency Glossary. And that was just basically defining, like, what does climate change mean? What is global warming? What are CO2 emissions? And so defining those basic key terms. And then after that, that's when we started working with like the UNEP, UNICEF, and some of our more institutional partners to translate their larger climate reports and documents, because we felt like it was really important for all the new literature that was being published to be received by as many people as possible.
Mm-hmm. And of course, you're not the only voice out there, and there's a lot of misinformation when it comes to climate change and just everything else out there. So how do you make sure you break through? How do you connect with people and with the correct information?
I think one of the best things that young people in the youth climate movement has done is utilize social media. And so my nonprofit, Climate Cardinals, the way we were able to grow to 9,000 volunteers in over 40 countries is through using TikTok. And so we've been able to reach hundreds of thousands of people through TikTok and Instagram, reaching millions. And I really do encourage people to think. I think that also part of the climate crisis is the crisis of creativity, where clearly we have maintained the status quo for years, and it's important to start thinking about how can we prioritize indigenous solutions, nature-based solutions, and thinking critically about what are the tools at our disposal. And I think that's one of the avenues that Climate Cardinals has pursued to reach as many people as possible with our work.
And I imagine your work is a bit more sophisticated than simply putting reports in Google Translate, sending that
Yes.
out. So could you elaborate, like, what are some of the nuances in terms of translating and maybe interpreting information for different people?
So there are definitely a lot of technicalities that are involved when it comes to translating climate information, in the sense that in a lot of different climate languages, climate change doesn't even properly translate. Like if you put it into Google Translate, it translates into weather, which we obviously know climate change does not equal weather. And so for a lot of the more technical, longer reports that we translate, we fundraise and we pay professional translators. And then we also go through a peer review process just to ensure that these are people who have expertise and understand how to translate the more technical nuances of these documents. Because if you put it into Google Translate, you're going to end up with something that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
And I guess from both of you, I think that's what's kind of interesting is here is that you're talking about problems that many people may not even know were there. I mean, like before this, I had not realized that the translation was such a big barrier. And Dr. Redvers, you mentioned that, languages as a solution. I did not know that that was even an option. When you're, starting from scratch, like here, like what's your entry point? Like, how do you convey to people that there's a problem that they may not recognize and perhaps a solution they may not recognize? I guess I'll start with you, Sophia.
I think for us, it definitely was in a way like a communications crisis, where I think so many people took for granted, like in this English speaking, like majority English speaking country, that, oh, because I'm receiving this information on my news channel, or because my friends are talking about this, that surely everyone has access to these resources. And that's kind of why I decided to start Climate Cardinals, is because I was volunteering with some of the largest grassroots climate organizations in the world all throughout high school. And I was struck by the fact that all of our documents and resources were only available in English. And so I started using storytelling as a vehicle, where I explained to people the reason I even came up with this idea is that my family is all Iranian. And so when I was growing up going to Iran, I realized they didn't know anything about climate change because there was a lack of climate literature available in Farsi, which is Iran's native language. And so I go and I would explain to people my story of working with my mom to translate climate documents into Farsi, because I wanted to teach my relatives. And I actually gave a TED talk about it last year, which has now reached over 1.5 million people. And I think that continuing to look for creative ways, utilizing storytelling as a tool to make people understand from your heart that this is why I'm tackling this issue, and this was my personal experience with it, and this is how we've been able to impact others.
And the same question to you, Dr. Redvers, like how do you communicate that there are in fact solutions that people may not have recognized?
Well, I think what's interesting from many Indigenous communities, and for my own as well, we were told stories. I have an elder who was born in the Satu region of Delaney, which is in Denendeh. It's a area in subarctic Canada, just on the edge of the boreal forest, another important forest within the globe. And she was told by her grandfather of times when the ground would start to sink upon itself, and we've started to see lakes sink upon itself with the permafrost melting up north. She was told of stories when the axis of the earth would tilt, and it would be a time of great change. And we've seen now from NASA a tilt of the planet occurring due to the polar melts redistributing the weight dimensions of the earth. She was told of a time when a sickness would wake up from the ground and cause human problems and animal problems too. And we've now seen the permafrost melting and old viruses and bacteria waking up from the ice. In fact, there was a indigenous family in Siberia that was infected with anthrax as a result of that. So a lot of these stories have been told throughout our communities of times of change. And now when I go home to my elders, they don't know about the carbon, they don't know about those things, but they'll tell me, Nicole, the ice is not melting the same way that it used to. It doesn't make the same noise that it used to. The trees, they look different on one side. They're starting to go yellow on the top, and we've never seen that before. The beavers are acting strange. They're coming out and they're making their houses earlier than they always used to make them. So these are they know the changes that are happening, but they may not necessarily associate it with some of these technicalities in the scientific realms and nomenclatures that we hear within those documents. So, I think it's really important that we think about different narratives of how to communicate these things, because it's absolutely right. There's a complete dominance within Western language discourse that does not reach or even meet with some of the realities that people are seeing on the ground.
And not to put you on the spot, Sophia, but given your work translating from English into other languages, I'm wondering, are there any efforts to maybe take some of this Indigenous work in Indigenous languages and bring it into English, into the mainstream?
That is such an important point. I think that that is something that like we have never considered just because we're not a very well-resourced volunteer-based youth-led nonprofit. But I definitely think it is a really important initiative and something that we would love to do.
Well, then to the resource question then, I mean, given that you're working on such a frontier of an area that like many people may not recognize as an issue, how do you go about pitching this? Like, how do you recruit volunteers and muster the resources to do this kind of work?
Yeah, I mean, I will be honest in the sense that it's extremely difficult to fundraise as a young person. I'm only 20 years old, and when it comes to the climate finance space, there's usually a lot of apprehension in giving a bunch of college students money to do this work. And so I think we've been lucky to apply for and get some grants from youth-led programs like National Geographic's Young Explorers program. But it's still something that we definitely struggle with and want to do more on because we think it's also really important to pay people for their work. So even though I think that it's incredible that we have built this great network of youth volunteers, I think that as I've grown as a college student, I've also seen it's really important. We pay professional translators now to do a lot of our work for us. And that's the model that we really want to look to going forward. So definitely it's something we want to continue to think about how can we convince funders to actually fund young people. And that's a lot of the work that I've been doing this week is meeting with different philanthropies and funders and explaining that only 0.76% of institutional climate finance actually goes to young people. I think that was the figure that we actually did a study to figure it out. That was the figure that is our preliminary result. So it's actually, that's another big issue that we've been talking about.
Mhm. And Dr. Revers, same thing. How has it been getting the resources to do your work and your research? And
Well,
what
I think you beat us by 0.01 because I think Indigenous peoples are like 0.75 of the climate finance space. And we've seen this increase in organizations too, stating that they're working with Indigenous communities, but they never name the community. They never name the region. So, you know, for us, it's always like, who are you really working with? There's a lack of accountability with this sort of new sexy kind of, you know, it's almost like that, like we're working with community, but are you really working with community? Because one of the issues that we have is we have these solutions. We know that things like language works. We got a group of Indigenous land defenders, scholars, elders, and community members together last year at the beginning of, or what are we now, 2022? So the end of 2021, to create from an Indigenous perspective what they thought the determinants of planetary health were. So people have probably heard of the social determinants of health, the things that make us well in our lives, built environment, all of these types of things. But we wanted to center Mother Earth as part of that. What are the determinants that make Mother Earth well? And the Indigenous group came up with a series of elements. One of them was Indigenous languages, Indigenous health, funny enough, and Health and Harmony is one of the few organizations that are bridging things like climate and health together. But if Indigenous peoples are not healthy, they're not going to continue to be able to steward 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity and steward a third of the world's last remaining old growth forests. So these are the types of things that we have a hard time funding because it doesn't make natural sense for financiers. It's like, we want the technology, we want the scale up, we want these, but it's like, no, those are not going to work at the community level. We've failed for 150 years as a society because this is the state of our world. So maybe we have solutions, but it's trying to line up those funding initiatives, which are very, very difficult sometimes.
I mean, you piqued my interest with the health element there. How do you connect individual or community-based health to a planet-wide problem like climate change? Like, what are the dots that you connect, and how does, you know, improving health outcomes, for instance, lead to a better planet?
Absolutely. So, you know, we had stated Indigenous people's health as a determinant of Mother Earth's health because of, you know, some of those important stewardship initiatives that we have, because it really is the amount of expertise and knowledge, deep knowledge of the planet, of our society, of our governance structures, of all of these things have been minimized for hundreds of years. And the ability to be well, to wake up. And I think in the video, it was great. I want peace. I think the woman stated, I want peace in my community. How many people wake up and feel like they have peace in their lives every day? You know, I'd be curious to see on a general scale if you wake up peaceful. And those are the basic human thing. We forget about the simple things sometimes in the complexity of the problems that we have, the multitude of crises that we're facing, those simplicities of peace. And those are the fundamental aspects of health and well-being that make an impact, because when we are well, from an Indigenous perspective, we are connected to land, we are connected to our environment. Your body is 60% water. You are the river. You are physiologically the river, the lake, the waters that come from the earth. You are the lake, you are the river, because you are nature. And we forget about that. The carbon that's in your body was created from long exploded stars. Imagine how long your carbon has been around for. Billions of years, that's inside of you right now. You are in and of itself nature. But we forget that connection. That is health and well-being, and that's why it matters. We need that remembrance for a healthy planet, because if we forget that, we become very disconnected and we don't have peace.
I think that's a fantastic point. And Sophia, you talked earlier about some of the resource constraints that you're kind of dealing with, but what would you do if you had the resources? Maybe not unlimited, but more than you have now. Like, what are your ambitions? What would you do if you had more to work with?
I think we would just scale up our programming and to be able to hire someone full time to manage all of the inquiries that we get. I mean, we have at least like 3 or 4 or 5 nonprofits reach out every single week who tell us that they have new documents, new resources, new toolkits, new video subtitles that they want translated into other languages that they simply don't have the resources to translate. And it's really hard when we have to go back to them sometimes and say, we also don't have the resources to translate them. And so I think that in an ideal world, especially for me, thinking about the fact that in 2 years, I mean, I'm going into my junior year at Stanford right now, but in 2 years, I'm going to graduate and going to be having to take on a full-time job. And I think that the heart of Climate Cardinals is that we are youth-led, and I want to pass on the helm to another young person and ensure this critical work continues to be done. And so thinking about how can we get resources to also pay young people for their work. I do all of my work on a volunteer basis and unpaid, but that's extremely unsustainable. And I think my vision would be that in a year or two's time, we would be able to fundraise enough so that I could hire another executive director who's a college student and actually pay them so that they can be committed and take on this work without also burning out while balancing a full-time course load.
Mhm. And Dr. Redvers, similar question. If we were to adequately fund Indigenous-led solutions, like what is the potential? Like what are we leaving on the table by neglecting these solutions and not adequately supporting them?
I think we're at the point now where we don't have a choice. I think we've passed that point of it. And my concern is that if we wait any longer for funding those important initiatives, that it's going to be a lot harder for all of us. These communities know the crises that we're in, and it's a delicate balance. We've had a lot of colonialism around the world. There's a lot of trustworthiness that has been created due to previous extraction, due to previous taking of things and utilizing it outside community for outside benefit, whether it's financial or otherwise. There's a lot of trust issues, and that is absolutely warranted based on the histories that we've had. And that creates challenges. And what it really means is relationships and building relationships, because I think if we don't start to get our butts in gear along these lines, we're going to have a harder time.
And then finally from me, I hope you can indulge me. I'm a science reporter and I have a researcher here, so I always love to ask, what is the big unanswered question? Like, what is the frontier or the big uncertainty that you're trying to resolve through your work?
Absolutely. I think the wearing my moccasins, I have a picture of my younger sibling, Tanshai, and she has a moccasin on one foot and a high heel on the other foot. And I think it's the enigma that we have these days within communities is we've had a world forced upon ourselves. And how do we reconcile some very deep and fundamental laws, sacred protocols that we have with this outside the window?
I think it's time that we can open this up to some audience questions. If anybody would like to pose a question to our panelists, I think we have a microphone floating around. Okay, cool. So please raise your hand and wait for the microphone to come to you. And please phrase your question in the form of a question.
Would you let them hanging there?
I see.
What are the health and harmony obviously being one of them? Beyond health and harmony, what are the best ways for people to fund Indigenous-led initiatives?
Well, I'm happy to say we have a speaker coming up in the next panel that is an Indigenous-led fund. And I hope to see more of those. That in my mind is the answer, one of the answers that you were talking about, because for far too long, we've had outsiders demanding certain ways that we spend money, report our outcomes, and it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. So the group that we'll be hearing from next has done a wonderful job, and I would love to see many more Indigenous-led funds who are actually the repository for funds, and they as a group now can be responsible for working with communities because they understand communities, they understand the way that community works in terms of both a funding but also a reporting standpoint, and I think it would make things much more efficient and make it easier to get across that trust and relationship issue that I was talking about previously.
Thank you. Anyone else? I think I saw a question. Hand in the back.
Thank you. So I work on kind of nature-based carbon project side of thing. I know carbon markets are a very kind of complex thing. And right now, from a lot of the perspective of our project proponents, it is one kind of really unique vehicle for getting private finance into nature conservation. And I'm just curious for kind of your perspectives on, are those kind of maybe market mechanisms, like, is there a role to play in the solutions, or should we be looking at something entirely different?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different opinions, of course, within this space, and I've heard, even within Indigenous organizations, there's been a lot of groups now thinking through indigenomics. It's actually, there's some great books on it. Actually, it really gets your thinking. How do we sort of again combine the moccasin with the high heels? That's the analogy I'll use, because really it is two completely different worlds. And how do you think through synergizing it? What I would love to see funded is an Indigenous, in fact, multiple Indigenous-led think tanks in multiple countries to put Indigenous people together to actually think through some of these things, because we've really never had the opportunity to have these discussions amongst ourselves to any substantial amount. But again, those are the types of things sometimes that are hard to get funding for. But we need the spaces to talk amongst ourselves so that we can start to figure out some of these things. And how do we bridge the moccasins with the high heels? I'm going to keep using that because it is a fundamental question I think we're going to grapple with.
You talked so eloquently about the Indigenous solutions, the failure of the sort of Western society to solve this problem, right? And the need to give over listening to Indigenous communities and stewards of the land for millennia for those solutions. How do you think we get through that fundamental problem of the lack of listening and respect for Indigenous knowledge? I thought it was a really interesting question of translating Indigenous solutions into English, but there also has to be respect for those solutions and true listening. And I think many of us that worked in this space have seen that it is difficult to actually have traditional knowledge and solutions taken by scientific and Western society as true solutions. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. The Western science has had a hegemony in the world, in thought process for hundreds of years and minimized other thought process. And we really have not had knowledge democracy. It comes down to that. We have not had a knowledge democracy where other knowledges have been listened to, and not necessarily as, a panacea, but to be able to sit at a table and have an even discussion. There has been a change in the last 6 months, even 2 years. I mean, month to month, I don't know what's going on, but, many of the Indigenous scholars that I'm working with, universities, it's a little bit different from country to country, especially those that are still colonized, like the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Rota, because people didn't leave. Whereas in other places, in the world, there's some different geopolitical dynamics that have occurred. And we've seen an opening. And I don't know if it's because of the crises that we face now. We're facing mental health crises. We're facing a crisis of loneliness in our society. And I think people are looking for something, to be frank. I think people are grasping and looking for something. And this happens to be something that is there. There's a risk of cultural appropriation and sort of, putting it on a pedestal in a way that's not healthy. So that's why we like to keep these conversations really grounded in what that means. But I've had many discussions with scientists, you know, and it's quite funny when you sort of say things like, I kind of tease some people sometimes. I'm like, okay, well, you know, if your science has all the, you know, all of the answers, what would happen if I dropped you in my forest without anything? How long would you survive? Because there's different types of sciences. There's applied sciences, and the sciences that we have enable you to survive out there. And I can tell you right now in the subarctic conditions, you're probably not going to survive very long, but it's the sciences of those people there over thousands of years that have allowed them to be healthy and well in a very hostile environment. So there's this sort of, you know, we like to tease in our societies, and Indigenous people are some of the funniest people you'll ever meet. You know you're in when they start teasing you. And we need to get back to the humility and just, but it's tough. It's tough sometimes. The biggest solution I find is just getting a platform in the space, because 5 years ago, I guarantee I wouldn't be sitting in this chair. Guaranteed.
Well, I think we have time for maybe one more question. Sophia, thank you so much for the work you're doing. And my question is, what are the top languages you're translating into, and which do you think are most impactful?
It really varies, I would say. We translate depending on our partner's needs, but I would say like the popular languages tend to be Spanish and French, and the languages that are more commonly spoken in the world. So that typically does end up being the 6 UN languages. And I think that when you talk about the fact that 75% of the world doesn't speak English, but then when you do translate into the 6 UN languages, that you account for then 50% of the world, you're obviously incrementally starting to cover a lot more ground. And I think that we have seen an enormous difference be made, particularly when we do work to translate into African and Indigenous languages and languages that are talking about the impacts of climate change on specific communities. Those are the projects that I really love taking on, because I do think that there is so much importance in making sure that those who are being disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis actually have access to the resources they need to understand the disasters that are impacting their communities, and more importantly, to know what they can do about it.
I think we're just about at the end of our time here. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you to our panelists for being here. Thank you for your wonderful insights.
While they're sorting that out, we would love to bring on the second panel with just a quick video on Rainforest Exchange. So please join us in seeing Health and Harmony's newest platform.
Knowing that the world needs to have carbon emissions by 2030, Health and Harmony developed a first-of-its-kind technology platform called Rainforest Exchange to rapidly expand impact. Rainforest Exchange has several key features, including rainforest reciprocity, data-driven updates, carbon neutrality, and radical listening education. Rainforest Exchange is the first application to center rainforest community design solutions and show impact in one place. Leveraging satellite data and machine learning technology, users can monitor forest carbon stocks and learn about the climate impact of their donation. Communities will also regularly receive deforestation alerts to support their capacity to protect the rainforest. In time, Health and Harmony will also include the capability to monitor community-defined well-being through a thriving index designed and reported by community members. Changes in biodiversity will be measured through bioacoustics monitoring. Rainforest Exchange builds on Health and Harmony's successful model of rainforest regeneration through radical listening, and brings it to the digital space by empowering the worldwide community to partner in mitigating global heating.
Thank you for watching. I'm putting myself out there for a minute here. So Grantham Foundation, along with Packard Foundation, have been longtime funders of Health and Harmony's model. More recently, Health and Harmony presented our concept of Rainforest Exchange to Grantham Foundation. Maki Tazawa from Grantham Foundation is present here, and I would like to invite her to share what she thought of that and publicly announce the foundation's decision.
Thank you. That was such a nice video. I felt like I was in a spa. But hi, my name is Maki, and I'm the program officer for the Grantham Foundation for the Protection of the Environment. As the name denotes, for over 20 years, we have been using both investments and philanthropic giving to work in the climate and the environment space. And for a number of years, we've known Health and Harmony. President met Henry back 10, 15 years ago, and modestly supported their work. And as a new team member, I've just begun to learn about their work this year, but it speaks very closely to my roots in the environmental space. I used to do conservation and sustainable development. And it was very traditional. It was the alternative livelihood, ecotourism model. Long years where we really wondered what kind of impact we were having on these communities and how long-term that impact would be. So when I learned about Health and Harmony, it really was a light bulb moment for me to think about their particular approach around radical listening and asking communities what they want, oftentimes healthcare. I think that's something we struggle with enough in this country, let alone in some of the more remote areas for Health and Harmony. So it made perfect sense that that was the basis of their work. It is going to be really mathematically impossible to decarbonize without protecting and restoring nature. That nature has innumerable ecosystem services, and that for most of us, nature is intrinsically beneficial even without those things. And there are so many options to do work protecting the natural spaces and working, and yet so few ways to measure that. When I think back on our time running that alternative livelihoods model, it was always so focused on figuring out how we were going to measure the impact and then re-report it back to other people. So of course, in the philanthropic world, we want to be funding the most effective, the most efficient projects with the data that back it up. But in taking a bit of a page out of Health and Harmony's radical listening work, we also believe it's important to listen to the organizations who are the actual experts in this space and listen to what they think really needs to be done. So with that, I'm happy to announce that we are committed to a multi-year $1 million unrestricted grant to Health and Harmony for them to continue their great work. As you'll hear more about climate finance, the next panel, I'll just tee it up a little bit in that we don't have the luxury of time anymore for the dual crises of climate and biodiversity issues. So these unrestricted funds are so important for organizations like Health and Harmony, not only for them to expand their ambitious plans and grow their impact to new communities and be able to build a resource like Rainforest Exchange that allows people to see what the impacts are on the ground and doesn't force arbitrary guidelines on communities on reporting. But it's also important and vital for Health and Harmony and other organizations to do this long-term planning, to find the talent that they need, and just continue the impact in the world. So we hope other funders, I know there are others of you here, join us in doing this type of giving. And with that, I want to thank Health and Harmony. I want to thank the communities that are really doing the work on the ground, and thank all of you here today for joining us today.
Thank you, Maki. With that, Mayor, please take it over.
Hello again, and I tee up our next panel. So our first panelist is Emma Pineda. She is the project officer for Latin America and the Pacific region at the Pawanka Fund. And this is a group that provides direct support to Indigenous groups around the world and helps them revive local learning and practices. And our second panelist will be Ashley Emerson, who is the Chief Programs and Research Officer for Health and Harmony. She also brought on, let's say, a stakeholder in the future of the planet as well. So let's make sure we try to solve these problems for them. I'd like to invite them up, please. Great. And I'm hoping with this panel, we can actually start drilling down into like how this work actually gets done and hopefully hear from you about the practicalities of this. But I guess I'd open up with a question for both of you. When figuring out who to work with on the ground, given that there are so many different groups doing so much different work, how do you filter that out, or how do you sort out who you want to work with and what kinds of things rise to your standards of support?
And to start, I want to share a little bit of Pawanka. Pawanka is an indigenous-led fund managed and guided by indigenous people for indigenous people. Our secretariat is indigenous people too. Our main objective is to trying to change the philanthropy have been through for many years with indigenous people. And we want to, our main objective is revitalizing our traditional knowledge. We are in the 7th socioeconomical region of the world. We have been working with more than 300 organizations, indigenous organizations, and our objective as the indigenous people have the opportunity to create their initiative and build and develop by themselves their activities in different areas. And we are 3 program officers, and we have been working in different regions. I work for Latin America, North America, and the Pacific. And we have another person in Africa, Asia. And the main point is be indigenous, because we know the differences between us. And when we see the difference, we really understand that everyone wants the same, get the opportunity to have we have our well-being and contribute for the development of indigenous people.
And same question to you, Ashley.
Thanks, Emma. It's so nice to be beside you and Umair for this opportunity. We're so excited to partner with Pawanka Fund. We think what they're doing is remarkable. And specifically, as we're preparing for scale, Pawanka Fund will work alongside Indigenous and traditional communities to equip them with the resources they need to receive transfers of wealth. Most importantly, because these communities are giving so much back to the world, but sometimes just don't have the mechanisms in place to be able to do that. So we're really excited to work alongside you, Emma.
And I'm sorry, just to add a little bit more, and all the funds that we get, 80% each go to indigenous people, and just the 20% each get for the secretariat. That's one thing. And another most important thing is the indigenous people who implement the activity, we give them directly to them, and we follow them, and we go to that place to see the activity that they doing. And this is really important because not all the organization does that.
So at Health and Harmony, we're focused on the climate and nature crisis. And our lane is tropical rainforests that house carbon and biodiversity, and indigenous and local peoples live within and alongside these forests. So to your question, Umair, when it comes to who do we work with, it's really those communities that steward these remarkable rainforests that give so much back to the planet. We, about 2 years ago, did some research on this. So how much do communities actually return to the planet? And we found that with a $5.2 million investment in Indonesia in community design solutions, they returned 12-fold in above ground carbon back to the planet. And that's just above ground carbon. That's not well-being, that's not biodiversity, that's not even considering below ground carbon. So part of what we're trying to do is really shift and change and challenge how we think about financing these communities and investing in their solutions. And most importantly, for them to be sitting in the seat of power to help give us the direction we need around how do we address the climate and nature crisis.
Yeah, and Dr. Redvers actually raised an interesting point in the earlier panel about how having an indigenous perspective on both the implementation side, but on the funding side is really important. And programming note, we were supposed to have another panelist, Manuel Chorempa, who is a Marubo tribesman, but unfortunately couldn't join us due to visa issues. And I would have loved to get his perspective on this. But I was hoping that you could just kind of talk about then what's different when you have an indigenous perspective on the funding side, on the when you're actually deciding who gets and what kinds of projects get funded.
Yeah, it's something that happened, at least for me. I'm from Mexico. Everything that we need as indigenous people, we can request to the government. But the government always said, No, there's not a way to do it. You need to form the documentation to do like this, but they never understood our way of working. The knowledge that we have in the earth. For example, Doctora said about the language, and I want to share a little bit of my language. I speak Maya language in the peninsula of Yucatan, and my father knows that the earth we have black earth. It's translated that means in Maya, red earth, and we have white earth. That's differences of the earth. But we have another terms to set earth. But if you go to the dictionary, everything is earth. But it's not the same because every word means if what the earth needs. Need water, need nutrition, what they need. And that's something that we are losing because we are not rescue that knowledge. And we have this opportunity to go with all elders because it's something that really like to work intergenerational, that the elders share the knowledge to the youth and the youth can rescue in the way that is better for us. So, and it's something that is not like this. And even the documentation and to apply for some fund is complicated. We need to be flexible the way that we give this fund to indigenous people because they are not, and they really know that they are doing. If there's a jungle next to 5 communities, no means that they don't know what to do with that. This jungle live because of the community, because we have this connection with them. So we need to think that if communities have been living until now without connection, without internet, without TV, it does not mean that they were wild. They know how to live in a better way in a connection with the communities and with the jungle, with the animals and with the plants. So we need to see that knowledge. We need to open our mind to see that knowledge and understand the way they are doing. If I want to, if some person really loves to live in the city, good. I'm not going to tell her, no, this is bad. No. If you want it, it's okay. I want the same that you want for you, for me. Get my opportunity to live in my jungle, to not destroy my jungle, and really understand that the knowledge that we have, that the elders give me, is really important.
And in pitching your work to funders, and do you frame it as altruism, an act of charity, or is this an investment, or is this some other thing that we haven't really thought of?
Yeah, this is one question that makes us think a little bit, because when we apply for funds, we apply for altruism, but for us, it's not like that. For us, it's a commitment because we are part of the community. I live in the community, the guiding committee. That's the guiding committees or leaders that guide. They are 10 elders and they know many. I've been working with indigenous people. They are indigenous and they have been working for many years and they have the expertise about each region. So the guiding committee knows that our life is really important. And when the way that we get support, I can give you support. And it's the same that you want to. If you want to action against the climate resilience, and you can support us because we are going to help you in our jungles, in our land. We are going to rescue animals, and this is another dynamic really beautiful that we have. It's not perfect, that the life in the community is not perfect, but we are really in connection with our animals and all that. That I was sharing to Doctora that just Sunday we have a pray for our land. My father get corn and pumpkins, and when we grow that, we need to give thanks to the land. So this is part of our dynamic, is part of our spirituality, and we need to see that. For us, at least for Pawanka Fund, it's a really commitment to see our communities in a better life and to have our well-being that we want.
And same question to you, Ashley, like what do you make of this altruism versus investment type framing, and does that work for this kind of work?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I love your response, Emma, and hearing what that looks like in real life, in real days in the forest. I think we're beyond that. We're trying to think beyond altruism. We're trying to think beyond investment and thinking really about reciprocity. Again, acknowledging and recognizing what communities do for the planet and do for us in our everyday lives, particularly sitting here in a seat of privilege in the global north. Thinking very differently about it because oftentimes the investment doesn't reach the communities. And if it does, it's usually been skimmed off from so many other organizations or so the opportunity doesn't reach as quickly as it should. So really thinking about reciprocity. And so, and within that, I think we try to really hold coloniality and social justice and racial justice and all of the challenges that we're experiencing globally within this concept of, being able to give to communities while they give so much back. So that's really what we're trying to understand, talk about, and appreciate.
I'm so glad you brought up justice. This week, the United Nations General Assembly is meeting, and some countries have been pretty explicitly talking about climate change as a justice issue and asking for climate reparations. I believe Pakistan was talking about that in the wake of the massive flooding they've seen across the country. And I'm wondering, to what extent does justice inform your work, and how does that play out on the ground?
And I think for justice for Indigenous people is not gonna happen for all that we have been through. But and I think that everything we are doing right now for the climate is really precious, and we keep doing that. Even if we don't have support for any fund, we are going to keep that because it's our life, it's our everyday for us, and we need to keep doing that all parents said to do, and we are going to do that because it's our life. To get and we are working in the different areas, and we are like a huge network, and we are in more than 60 countries, and we are sure that everything that in my Chuck organization in the Micronesia is a different action that the person in Colombia is doing, but we are going to support them because if their organization is working for their rescue of the knowledge, for their future, we are going to support one organization, indigenous organization that gets support and do something for themselves is a huge step for all of us because we need to support each other as indigenous people. And for example, we have been part of the capacity building is something very important for us. We work with indigenous huge organization networks, and we have organization new, small, or just elder that they don't have idea how to use a computer, and we are going to support that. We give them mentoring. We try to communicate with them the way that they can. If we are going to go to, we are going to Colombia in middle of the mountain to go, then we are going to do that because we have been supporting in different areas, and we try to get that. It's complicated for us because not have the fund enough to do all that, but we try our best to do it.
Any thoughts on that, Ashley?
Just that justice is central. It's so central. I think here at New York Climate Week, ahead of COP27 in a couple of months, we're talking about loss and damage. These are the billions of dollars that were promised from developed economies to countries that are suffering so dearly from the climate crisis, but contributed nothing to it. That's an issue of justice. And they're just kind of discussing at the highest ranks of government headed into these meetings, should this even be on the agenda? Yes, it should be on the agenda. It should be central to the agenda. Those funds should be there, and they should be addressing the consequences that countries are experiencing. We work in Madagascar in the southeast, which is an area where communities are ravaged by cyclones and at a higher intensity. And you already have food insecurity. You already have potential for spillover. You already have extreme deforestation. And so these are mechanisms, just like Rainforest Exchange, that can really help benefit these communities. And more importantly, working upstream of these issues. I think loss and damage and some of these conversations we're having this week are really about responding to the climate and nature crisis. But, what Emma and her communities are doing, they're helping prevent these crises that we're all experiencing. And I think that is so critical. And to me, that's what's really central in the justice aspect.
And Emma, you talked a bit earlier about how having an Indigenous perspective on the funding side lets you have new benchmarks. And I'm wondering, how do you show that what you're doing is working? Like, what are your standards of success when you're looking at a project or on a larger scale? How do you demonstrate that what you're doing is leading to good results?
Yeah, we work based on trust of Indigenous people. And we have tried since the beginning, we have tried to communicate with them and like I said, in an informal way, maybe if we said like this, but it's not noisy. It's not informal because we are trying to increase this communication. When they something that we start a communication and okay, this project, we are going to work with this organization. Now we support them and accompany them to create the project. We don't do the projects; they do the projects. They do the budget. They do everything that they're going to do. We check is complete. Yeah, is or criteria is okay for Indigenous people. Perfect. Go ahead. The project start and we start to follow that. When we do this connection with them, they just send us the information. They send us picture and they invite us to go there and we go there and see that what they are doing. So I think it's the confidence as Indigenous people. If you are talking with someone that have the same experience with you, really can understand your situation and they are open. And we are so happy to say that we still have the communication with all the 300 organizations until now. If we need to support, if we need to help them to, for example, get sometime if you're going to go to the United Nations or they're going to do any activity, we are going to support them because we know that they are working good and they are doing something to make the change.
And again, same to you, Ashley, like what kind of accountability mechanisms do you have in Health and Harmony's work and what are some of your benchmarks for success?
Yeah. So we collect a lot of data and we have a proof of concept portfolio working in communities to show in scientific literature and doing this research to be able to prove that this is effective. And I'm not sure if Woodwell Climate Research is in the room. Dr. Wayne Walker, who we work closely with, has worked his whole life to establish Indigenous and local people protect and preserve the environment. Here's the data. It's all real. It's very significant. And so we feel like in terms of accountability, it's been established. And so what we've tried to do through Health and Harmony and Rainforest Exchange is now focus on influencing donors and influencing people who are interested. And I'm so thankful to have some of the most progressive institutional donors in the room here today who have a similar mindset, which is funding should be unrestricted. There doesn't need to be onerous accountability mechanisms. But again, working with Woodwell, we're looking at, how do you monitor carbon and send out deforestation alerts in real time so that we can see the work that these communities are doing and give that feedback in much more real time. Also, biodiversity. How do you monitor biodiversity to see, again, what these communities are doing for the planet? And then lastly, Human Thriving Index that's determined by and decided by and developed by Indigenous and local peoples working alongside some of Dr. Redvers' lab and students. It's critical because we don't have these indicators in our current literature that talk about emotional or spiritual relationship with nature or the earth around us. And so I think for us, it's so much about deconstructing that, leveraging those mechanisms to be able to shift the discourse around monitoring and really it's a thank you, to these communities for all that they're doing.
And Emma, bringing in a question that I asked in the first panel, but like, what are some of the obstacles you've run into in terms of getting the resources and the funding that you need, and how do you get around that?
And it's a little bit complicated for us because for Indigenous people, we only have 1% of the funds and less that 1% really reach Indigenous people. So to trying to support that, we are so happy for all the funds that really the funders that support us. They trust on us at the same situation. We are trusting our Indigenous people, and they are receiving the best of us, of Indigenous people, the best numbers, and because the funds that no belong to Indigenous people only want numbers. This is true. and we don't see the well-being that the indigenous people is happening. And every time when we had a fun meeting, we really share that we are doing this, and we are going to do that. I hope you can support us. And we are open to be flexible, but we want that funders be flexible to work with us, because it's not the same. We are living, for us is our way of living. It's very important to say that, because there's no another reality that, okay, the Pawanka is doing this and they live in the city and the communities are there. No, we belong there, and everything good step for us is for everyone.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about some of the practical work that you're doing. Is there a particular project that kind of stands out in your mind, or just a really interesting, example or something that really excites you in some of the work that you've funded?
Oh, a lot. And because I am program officer, so I am the person of the organization that knows all the projects, but at least for my regions. But for example, I like to share about the partnership that we have with Rapa Nui people in the Eastern Island. We have been working for them since the beginning, and we are going to support them to create, to grow their own food and exchange with another ways to get support. And during this pandemic, the island was closed for 2 years, and for that project, they get something to eat, and they shared with another in the same community. They share food and everything, and that's something that is something that makes us proud, because they never thought that this could be happen to them, because they live on the tourists. It's an island that live on the tourists. So if they don't have visiting, they are going to have money. And for that, during this process, we really learned for the different process. Another that's happened also for the pandemic, we had a project in Bolivia in 3 places, really far from the another. And they were working food system. They are growing in a different way food, but the pandemic started. So they can sell the fruit, they can sell the corn, the potato. So they, with our connections, because we had exchange between the organizations, and they have this connection, and they make a exchange of the fruit without money, just exchange. Maybe the north need corn, but the south need potato, so exchange that. So we are revitalizing our knowledge or ways to do that our life. And that is really important for us. Maybe for them, then do not realize that they are doing, but for us it's really important. And now that we are working within this year and the next year, we are going to work in a specific with indigenous languages, and we are create like a line of projects. I said line because we are trying to connect indigenous languages in different parts of the world. And the main point is to create this line within the different indigenous languages, but do it by youth. There's something that is different, because we just based on traditional knowledge. That means that elders is number 1, but for us, it's gonna be for youth to revitalize the indigenous languages. So we are too open to see the difference. So we are going to have a group of reggae in Maya language. We are going to have a TikToker. We are going to have a singer, pop singer. We are going to have different, but the main point is important, because we are going to revitalize this knowledge. And the youth are so happy, because they think that we are going to, all the indigenous people that are trying to get support for the initiative knows that if I get fund, it's gonna be crazy. Documentation and get the budget, that everything. And it's complicated, 1, because they live in the community. They can, they can get a ticket for a bottle of water. So they don't have the way to improve this waste of the money. So it's something that we really like. I hope we can get more support to keep doing that. Now we are doing like this line, Copañac, that's gonna be, Copañac is aligned for Colombia, Bolivia. It was aligned for exchange food many years ago. Right now, it's just the way, just the street. But we are going to use excuse to connect indigenous leaders, youth people to exchange the knowledge. We are going to work at the same time with Maya. In the Maya language, we have like more than 100 languages, Maya, the Maya family, and we are connect different projects and different Maya from Mexico, from Chiapas, from Yucatan, and from Guatemala to get that. So we are planning to do the same situation in the Pacific. We are starting with Micronesia, and so it's gonna be crazy. I hope I can share more in the future. We are planning that for.
Well, I really look forward to your TikTok stars.
Yeah.
Ashley, do you have a favorite project?
I don't have a favorite one, but I love them all, right? I have two
I know.
children, so I've learned how to. But I think what has been remarkable is watching these communities and the places we work and how people have responded to the COVID pandemic. That it's been a really challenging 2.5 years, as I'm sure you all have experienced. And to see the programs expand, to see forests grow, to see nurseries being built, to see food security being put in place, and also more sustainable livelihoods and jobs being grown and built as well has been remarkable. And then to see these frontline healthcare workers who are responding to COVID, malnutrition, all kinds of challenges, also being able to bolster, support, and hold these communities and at such a critical time has been really inspiring. And now, as we're kind of catching our breath not on the other side of this pandemic, we're very much still in it. Being able to see them think further ahead. Okay, the next climate shock is coming. How do we prepare ourselves? How do we prepare the rest of the world? And, working alongside communities in the Xingu River Basin, an indigenous elder said to us, we've seen the end of the world. And so we can help you prepare. And I always think about that because it's so true, having seen so much of their environment degraded and destroyed, but being out there working hard every day to repair and restore, continue to protect has been remarkable. So we're really excited to continue to scale and grow this work and work alongside more and more communities. But I would say all the rainforest communities are so uniquely remarkable and fascinating. And it's just been such an honor to be beside them.
Mhm. And while climate change is, a major central issue, it's not the only issue that these communities are dealing with. And I'm wondering, how do you retain focus on this and not dilute the scope of your work? And, in the previous video, they talked about inflation being a major concern for some of these communities. And you mentioned the pandemic as well is still lingering in many of these areas that are far more remote or much more vulnerable to these kinds of infectious disease. Oftentimes, they're the first people to get infected when there is a new outbreak as well. So you already have all these health concerns. So how do you keep the eye on climate, or how do you prioritize it with all the other concerns that many of the communities you work with face?
For us, each project, like I said, is specific. So, and if we are planning to work for climate action, the organization by themselves knows for do an action for climate, they need to be good then. So they took decision to, okay, we are going to do that, but we need support for health, and we need to revitalize our traditional way of see the health. So they get the knowledge and they share the knowledge how to help themselves, and they do. Okay, we are going to do a huge house to have this meeting. They's going to maybe they said, why they need a house? They have their house. They can meet there. Just saying, no? But create this house, help the community to connect themselves. If they connect themselves, they can do great things, because in at least for our communities, the parties and the governments try to divide the communities. When they divide the communities, they can fight for their rights. Is when the companies come to our lands to get and destroy the jungle, they do that. That's the first thing that they do. So, and we can't give just a number, because when they do action, they see different areas, their work in a cycle, because this cycle is the way that you're living. Each project help many people, in not just in one area. They work in different areas at the same time. That's something really important to say, because when they want, okay, we need to know the numbers on the climate resilience, what is the data of that. We can do that. We can give you what happened with these communities, because they are doing great and they are saving the forest, the jungle, the mountains, because they are happy what they are working on. The community can support, and how I say, our life is kind of simple, and we like that. It's not simple, no means that it's not important, because it's really important. Every ceremony, every activity is really important for all the communities, and we have this connection. So for the beginning, if you want to work with Indigenous people, you need to think that there's not gonna be a good thing about climate. There's gonna be a good thing about a good number of climate. We are going to be a good number about health, about reciprocity, communication, and intergeneration and knowledge, and going to be work youth and elders, women, and everything together, because the activities is like this, in the communities work like this. Everything that we are going to do, we are doing together.
That's wonderful to hear. I think this is a good time to open the floor to audience questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand and there will be microphones floating around.
Hi there, hi there. My name's Paul Davis. I work for the largest COVID survivors group on Earth. And it's really exciting what the fund is doing with Health and Harmony, and with what's happening now after a pandemic is groups like Health and Harmony and ours and many others, some of them are here, have fought for a new global fund to pandemic proof and to stop pandemics. And they're a product of zoonotic spillover. Health and Harmony tries to prevent the outbreak from happening in the first place. The World Bank, that is going to operate this fund, wants to stop the spread of outbreaks after, because poor people just die sometimes. Indigenous people just die, and so what's happening, who's at the table more often than not at these conversations is not Indigenous communities. It's groups that want to get a big fat check to send someone around to give technical assistance to Indigenous communities and tell them what to do, instead of listening to what we need, what the world needs to do, which is to help prevent the outbreaks from happening in the first place. So it's awesome what you all are doing. And I wonder if you can rally some of the other funders to get behind groups like Health and Harmony to help get those voices to the table for this World Bank fund, for instance, to make sure that we're preventing, going right there to the front lines of zoonotic spillover, right at the middle of climate and health and pandemics is that thing where you chop down all the trees and scare up the bats and all the people die. So if we can get more of the voices from the front line, like you all are doing, they're at the front line of the World Bank, then maybe we can really do some damage.
Yeah, how do you bring in some of the big name funders to the table, like your peer groups, or maybe some of the folks that have more money? How do you invite them into this discussion?
I think if any discussion, if there's not Indigenous people there's not going to be something good for Indigenous people. It's easy. Maybe it's a little bit rude, but it's like this, because they do not understand our way of life. And this is one. When the pandemic started, we are a little bit worried about. We have like 40 or 50 projects active in that moment. I would say, okay, they are not going to do nothing. What is going to happen? Let's wait. And their organization, each organization, take the best decision to complete their project by themselves. One was, and they are going to do a huge garden of traditional plants, medicine, and for medicine. And I was thinking, okay, they are not going to do nothing. Let's wait. And they called to me, hey, Emma, we are to keep working, but we create a schedule to everyone go to give water to the plant, to see the plants, but nobody can see each other. We are working like that. Perfect. They themselves find a way, the situation. What was the principal problem of the COVID? The the cuts of the communication for our government. They do not, they stop the communication. You can go to another community because it's closed, and that's what the main problem for this, because there's communities they are living close. They are working together as a network, and that was one of the situations. The rest for the food, most of the community exchange in between communities, we need to stop thinking that indigenous people do not have idea what to do. We know what to do. That the only that we need is support or way that we are working. If I share to you what's the way for my well-being, please support, because I know that this is my way to do that. I'm in all of us has this opportunity, but something that we need to say that indigenous people, we have collective rights, and everything that we want is for collective. This is really important. It's not for Emma, it's not for Carla, it's not for each guiding committee, it's for everyone. So I hope that the funders that planning to work with indigenous people really open their mind on the way we are doing, because we are going to give the funders the best results about that.
And I think, Paul, it's a seat at the table. Don't get me started on the World Bank. We know the challenge with this fund sitting there. It's a seat at the table, and you had Indigenous and local communities out at COP27 in the streets who didn't have passes to the blue zone saying, send us the money, damn it. We need it, and we have the solutions, and we can do it. And, working alongside communities during COVID, we saw what it took to get these vaccines several days upriver on ice, and the amount of sitting next to people to be able to administer a vaccine is remarkable. Number one, because of trust, and it's really challenging. But number two, it's, again, they didn't create this problem. And so just being on the receiving side of this is frustrating. And I think it comes back to justice. So much of this comes back to justice. So much of it comes back to equity. We really need to be thinking differently about it. We need Indigenous and local peoples in the driver's seat, driving the agenda around the climate and nature crisis, around preventing pandemics. And we really appreciate that work that some of our colleagues in the room are pushing for. And I just think using our voices, speaking up, and trying to get seats at the table for our Indigenous and local colleagues.
If I may, Ashley, I'm kind of curious, with Indigenous-led frameworks, have you found that other funders are receptive to this idea, perhaps in other contexts? We often talk about Indigenous-led work in the environment, but what about in terms of economics, conflict avoidance, business development, and health, as you alluded to? Are other people open to this kind of idea, this framework that you're using?
I would say it's growing. It's limited, but it's growing because, here we are at this moment that we're all experiencing every day in the climate crisis, and we feel it, and it's upon us, and it's very much here. And we were just slammed with all these IPCC reports the past 2 years saying, not only is the window smaller, but it's way worse than we ever thought. And so, being able to really listen to these communities who are giving us these intersectional solutions to say, here's what we can do. And there definitely are some donors and philanthropists that are standing up and saying, yes, we believe in this. We think this is really important. It's, time to listen, but it's not as fast as we'd like. And that's why, we just kind of decided we need to create the Rainforest Exchange so that people can give direct to community design solutions without having to go through some sort of middle mechanism to do that, or one that doesn't have Indigenous leadership or support embedded within it. And so that's really what we're hoping to do more of.
Are there any other questions? We have one in the front.
Thank you. These are just great panels, so really appreciate this opportunity. I have a question for Emma about the transfer of knowledge over generations. This is a follow-up to Dr. Redvers' comment about the Batwa situation, and how there was a group of people that were banned from entering the forest, and there's a whole lost generation who don't have access to the knowledge. But beyond that, speaking from personal experience, I'm Indian of heritage, and my ancestral people come from a relatively less populated area of India, but there's a strong appeal to move towards urban areas. And then in my own situation, my family and I, we immigrated to the United States. And then there's just a loss of knowledge over time. And there's a strong appeal towards, I think, a Western lifestyle because of the ease of life and the commodities and access. And again, I'm I'm a product of all of that, and I perpetuate that. But how do you, in your situation, you brought up TikTok and all, is that a struggle that you are facing, that younger generations may be less interested in the knowledge, and how do you keep that interest and pass knowledge over time?
Yes, it's really complicated because everyone, we were youth and in some part of our life. So for us, we are having through every day, at least indigenous people, every day, there's no any moment that they are, the non-indigenous people try to make us feel that we are nothing, we don't know the knowledge, we don't belong here, we are browns, we are wild, and every day. And that is one situation. Second, to start to study, I think the main problem is the education in Mexico, at least speaking by experience, they try to create this Mexican culture in general. And it's not like that. In Mexico, we have 65 indigenous people that we speak different languages. So, and that is one that every day we are against that wave, huge wave that make us feel that we can do that. But in the moment that you understand that the moment that your parents, your grandmother sing a song with you in your language, or the moment that you get some knowledge that you never get, that you know that that is your identity, and that you way you want to do. Because I know that most of the youth people is pressured to go to the city to change the way are living, but there is some person that start to see that differences, and that is the youth that we are going to support, because we are not going to press any person. We are not going to say, okay, you are indigenous, you have to do that. No, no. If they don't want, okay, it's good for you, because we need an engineers too. So go to study and do your life. But I know from my experience that all indigenous people come back home. Maybe not physically, but I listen ideas. I listen the way you're doing, because everything that we have, our parents give it to us. If for us is, and for example, I can see my grandma and without the kitchen. But every food that I get is in my mind for the rest of my life. I don't have my grandma more, but I remember her singing me in Maya. I remember her cooking good food that I'm not going to taste again, because she do not share this knowledge to my mom, because my mom was really focused on study. I need to get studied for a better future. And she forgot to get this connection. But for me, that I was young, I get this connection. So at least for me, for my family, I think I should keep doing that, because that's make me happy, and that makes me my identity and what they are. So support indigenous leaders that want to be part of the community is awesome, is golden for us. For that reason, we are going to support, because these are going to be our leaders of our communities in the indigenous world. If they are not going to work, for example, I was studying English, Chinese, and maybe my mom think, oh, she's going to go to the city and do another things. But I'm working with indigenous people using that I learned. What mean that? That in my community needs someone that speak another language. There is someone that knows about international situation, about the indigenous rights, the human rights. That's why I'm here. So we need to indigenous people knows everything about that. And knowing about everything, take the decision to keep being at home and rescue our knowledge.
Great. That's a great sentiment to end on. I would like to first thank our panelists, Emma and Ashley, for joining us. And before we just wrap, oh, go ahead, please. And I'll just invoke my moderator's prerogative to just make a quick comment that I hope that everybody did learn something here, but also will take away a drive to act, that climate change is a real and overwhelming problem, but there are solutions. And the people that are often the most affected by it, who are on the front lines of the effects of climate change, are also there with the solutions as well. And I hope that nobody will despair and realize that there are people that you can reach out to and projects underway right now that are working to solve these critical challenges. So I hope in the discussion after this that you'll reach out to some of the panelists here and continue the work going forward. Thank you again for all of you.